Have you ever wanted a glass of wine, but maybe you didn't want to have to waste an entire bottle because you knew you weren't going to be able to finish it before it would go bad? Or maybe you have that constant predicament where you love white wine, but your friend or boyfriend loves red wine, and you know you can't open two bottles, so someone has to compromise. Well, these were lots of common issues before the Coravin. The Coravin is a really incredible wine tool and a device that has truly changed the wine industry. Hi, friends. My name is Sarah. I'm a certified sommelier and host of the Wine CEO podcast. And this week on the show, I'm interviewing Greg Lambrecht. Greg is the founder and inventor of Coravin. And today on the show, he talks to us about how he came up with this incredible invention, who it's a really great device for, and the different models that they've been designing over the last few years. It's an incredible episode. If you haven't heard of this device or if you're curious to learn more, it's a really fun episode, and I have to admit I was fangirling a little bit because Coravin is a really incredible name in the industry, and Greg is an amazing entrepreneur, and I was so excited to sit down and chat with him. So let's dive into my conversation with Greg Lambrecht. Well, Wine CEO podcast listeners, I am so excited because today on the show, I have Greg Lambrecht. And Greg is the inventor and founder of Coravin, which many of you have heard about. I talk about it pretty often on the Wine CEO podcast. It always makes it into my holiday gift guide every year. It's a phenomenal product, and there's a lot of models and a lot of things to talk about. So I've been really looking forward to this conversation with Greg because it's a product that I know and love. This is not sponsored by any means. This is truly just me being passionate about this and getting connected with Greg so that we could talk about this amazing invention that is a tool that's truly, I think, revolutionized a lot of service in the wine industry. So really excited to have Greg on the show. Greg, welcome to the Wine CEO podcast.
Well, thank you for all the kind words. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Wonderful. Well, I think it'd be great if we could start off. Maybe you could just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, why you love wine. Tell us, why you got this idea for Coravin and just about the Coravin brand in general.
Sure. Well, I wasn't a wine professional before I started Coravin. I guess I still am not a wine professional. Never taken a class, but just fell in love with the stuff when I was a kid. Probably illegally. I was 16 years old, living in Southern California, going to high school, and friends thought I looked older, and they drove me up to Napa Valley, and I walked into Tony Pageau's winery, Pageau, and it was, I think, his first vintage, which dates me, and I tasted it, and I was like, this is the best thing I've ever tasted. My parents didn't drink, and so I just absolutely fell in love with it. He spent the next 45 minutes to an hour explaining to me how he had done what he had done. My friends thought I'd been arrested, before they came in. So it was really, Tony started off my love in wine, and then it sort of expanded when I went to college. Went to college on the East Coast. I'd been drinking exclusively California wine, and so then I got exposed to French and Italian wines and Spanish wines, and realized that there was this incredible and almost unending world of variety of these amazing smells and tastes. My grandfather-in-law at the time, after I got married, he served me a glass of 1990 Chave Hermitage, and it was just so stunning. I remember thinking, this doesn't taste anything like a grape. How do we do this? How do we make this stuff? So along the way, I had a job, and my work was in medicine. So I'm a physicist and an engineer. And so I started working in medical devices at Pfizer and inventing new medical therapies. So, along with the evolution of my wine love, I had this medical work that I was doing. I was essentially an inventor inside of Pfizer, inventing new medical therapies for them, and working with a guy who actually wound up becoming my co-founder at Coravin. And so one of the first products I ever developed was a chemotherapy delivery system. And it's something you implant underneath the skin, and you would access it with a needle over and over again during the course of somebody's therapy over months. And so I got really good at making needles that went in and out of things without doing damage to them. So the foreshadowing. My wife at the time was not a huge fan of wine. She drank Nebbiolo only, pretty much. I love Nebbiolo as much as the next person, but it's not the only thing I want to try. I want to drink some white wines. I want to try Burgundy. I wanted to try Oregon Pinot Noir next to Burgundy, and to learn faster. I wanted to explore Chardonnays from around the world. I wanted to explore Grenache from around the world, Syrah from around the world. So, but I was constrained by the volume that wine was sold to me. I had to commit to a full bottle of wine in order to learn how that wine tasted and why it was the way it was. And I wasn't going to be drinking, Chardonnay from Margaret River and Chardonnay from California and Chardonnay from, Oregon or Burgundy side by side on a Wednesday, because that would be 4 or 5 bottles I would be opening, and ultimately they would go bad. But it's what I wanted to do. And so I remember sitting in my kitchen holding a bottle with a needle in my hand going, there's just got to be a way I can get wine out of here with this. And luckily I'm a physicist and an engineer, and not the first prototype, but the second prototype worked. And I remember it was a $10 bottle of Spanish wine. And I poured the first glass. So the way Coravin works is the needle goes through the cork, and then argon gas, which is one of the gases used by winemakers in the bottling process to clear the bottle of any air before they pour wine in. Argon gas is inert, has no smell, no taste. It's in the atmosphere we're breathing. So I chose that gas after a lot of research. And it pushed the wine out of the bottle into my glass, so no air got in. And then I pulled the needle out and the cork resealed. I remember looking at the bottle going, wonder how long that's going to last. Right. And so I was CEO of 2 medical companies at the time that I had founded. And so I was like, okay, I should probably do some experimentation. But that first night, the experimentation went a little off the rails. I had 5 different wines that I was able to taste. I was like, wow, it works. Okay, great. And so I remember thinking, okay, well, I want there to be zero hesitation between me and any glass that I have, any bottle that I have in my house. And if a friend comes over, I want to be able to serve them whatever they want, not just what's open. And if my wife wants to have Nebbiolo, I can, serve her 3 different Nebbiolos, and she can try all 3 and decide which one she wants a glass of. In order to do that and feel comfortable, I have to believe that the wine doesn't change as a result of what I've just done. And so what does that mean? So I run clinical trials in medicine for my companies. I thought, okay, well, I'm going to do a blinded, prospective, randomized trial of wine, and I'm going to blind taste wines that I've Coravin a month ago, 6 months ago, a year, 2 years, 5 years ago, versus a bottle of the same wine from the same case that has never been touched, and see if I can tell the difference. And so that led to 11 years worth of testing. And I got to tell you, during those 11 years, I learned more about wine than you can imagine, because friends would come over, they started to see me drinking wine this way. And they were like, hey, can I have one? And, oh, by the way, have you tested it on this grape? And I would go, well, no, but I will. And so I would add that grape to the test. And that meant buying 6 bottles of that wine so I could do it over different periods of time and have control bottles. And so by that crazy declension, I wound up having 800 different wines and probably about 3,000 bottles of wine in my basement that I was testing in some way over those 11 years. And once I got to 5 years, I was like, okay, well, it works. There's no difference between a multiply Coravin bottle and this. And one of my friends came over because I'd been giving them away as gifts. And he goes, if you don't start a company, I'm going to. Like this, everybody wants this. Restaurants want it, wineries want it, consumers want it. You've got to launch this. This is not just a hobby that you do in your basement. You've got to make this a company. And so that led to Coravin. We founded in 2011 and launched in 2013. It's been crazy.
It's incredible. Now I have to ask, when you first started, did you have the intention of creating a company, or were you truly just doing it for fun because it seemed like a unique thing to play around with?
I did not think of it as a company. So I actually founded it when my wife at the time was pregnant. And so it was our second kid, and she'd stopped drinking completely. So I was in absolute crisis mode. And so I can date the age of Coravin to my younger son's age. He's now 24 and 6'4", big software programmer, really wonderful kid. So I did not think of it as a company for at least 4 or 5 years. Because I know I filed the patent in 2004. He was born in 1999. So I played with it for at least 4 or 5 years. And in 2004, I gave one as a gift to one of my medical investors and very close friends as a wedding gift. And he immediately came back and asked for more. And so I remember and he actually asked me if I could donate one to an auction for a health charity. And so I filed the patent in advance of that, and it wound up. So when I would give Coravin to people, I would ask, they said, "Hey, can I pay you for this?" And I would say, no, just send me wine that you think is interesting and that you like. And so people would send me wine, and some people would send me like a case of Magnums, because that's what they felt that it was worth, because they had changed the way they drank wine. And at this auction, I think the first prototype went for a few $1,000s. And so I started to think, okay, well, maybe this is a company and I should get off my lazy hind end and start doing something. But it still took me another 7 years from then, because I hadn't proven to myself that it worked.
I think that's what's so incredible about the story. I mean, I love the scientific approach you took in, I mean, over a decade of research. You went through, I mean, you mentioned 3,000 bottles, it's probably even more. And I mean, the amount of care you took into making sure that this product was so bulletproof that you knew it was going to wow consumers and really perform the way you wanted it to. I think that speaks volumes to the way that the product came to be and why it's so successful today. You didn't just, dream up something and then a year later it was on the market. This is something that really, it took a long time for you to really bring it to fruition. And no wonder it's so popular today and is so successful, to your point, at homes, in restaurants, in every aspect of the wine industry, in wineries, because it's tried and true. It's an amazing product and it works really, really well.
I appreciate it. I think it's one of the pluses and minuses of my being in medicine. In medical devices, you try as much as you possibly can to make something that will never fail. And you can never get to zero failure, just because human anatomy and pathology are always so unique. So to make one thing that works across all people and all states of the disease is tough. And with Coravin, I sort of took the same philosophy. I tested it on different types of cork, fully natural cork, all sorts of different capped composites. Doesn't work on plastic, for example. I found this out as I was testing. I wanted to make sure that it worked on vintage wines, that it worked on. So I had that mindset from medicine. And you'll actually notice that if you look at the bottom of your Coravin, right underneath the head where the needle attaches, you'll see a serial number. And that's something that comes from medicine as well. In consumer products, you don't normally serialize every single unit. But in Coravin, I wanted there to be traceability. I wanted us to be able to say, hey, something went wrong with that device. What went wrong? What is the history of that system? So I think, I kind of looked at wine and many doctors have told me wine was one of the first medicines. So how do we take as much care with wine as we do with people? So it's my love and it's my passion. And I wasn't under pressure to launch because I had my medical work, right? It was actually hard for me to launch because it meant more time to be committed. But it's such a passion. I think that's something you find in wine at all levels of the industry and of the consumer, is that it's something that incites passion. There's something about the variability and complexity of the way it smells and the way it tastes and the regions that it comes from. And wine is produced in beautiful places by really nice people, right?
It's true.
It's always involved with friends and food, and it's just it's why it's been with us for 8,000 years. It's a magical thing.
It's very communal. And I think one of the things that the Coravin can really help with, to your comment earlier, sometimes when you're gathering in a group of people, everyone has different tastes and preferences, or you just want to learn more. I mean, you have this opportunity to experience maybe, 3 different varieties from the same region or the same variety from multiple regions. And that's something that Coravin gives you the opportunity to do, because before the Coravin, you'd have to open up a bottle and finish it. If you're not going to finish it that night, you better finish it in the next 2 days and have that plan to drink a lot of wine, or it's going to go bad. And I think what is so revolutionary about the Coravin is it doesn't pressure you as the consumer to feel like you have to overdrink, overconsume in a short period of time, right? It gives you this ability to be patient. You know, if you have an incredible wine that you are aging, let's say for 20 years in your cellar, and you want to be able to taste it and see if it's ready, you can taste a little bit and know if it's ready before having to open it and then find out, well, I opened it 10 years too early or 2 years too early, and now it's wasted, right? There's so many incredible ways that you can use the Coravin to really make your wine experience so much better, whether you're in formal education and service or just enjoying as a consumer. And I think it's opened up a lot of opportunities for saving money for consumers and also just for improving their overall experience.
I think that's it. It's you know, most people think of wine preservation as eliminating waste, and I appreciate that. I mean, that's what Vacuvin and all the spray cans and everything else. You open the bottle and you can get it to last for another couple of days. But what if it's not the wine that you want? What if you open a bottle and that's not the wine that's right for tonight? It's not meeting your palate, or it's not meeting your spouse's palate, or your friends, like you were saying. What I think about with Coravin is if you can make preservation so transparent and so long that there's zero hesitation to tasting something, I look at Coravin really as an opportunity to increase your experiences. It's not, sure, it prevents waste, but it optimizes that glass. Have the perfect glass of wine any night of the week, because you're able to taste 2, 3 and say, no, that's not it. I'll try this one. And so it's, in the end, Coravin winds up being a pretty substantial change in behavior, right? Because everybody, we always say that they drink down the bottle. They open the bottle, and whether it's the right bottle or not, that's the one they're going to finish, and they're going to finish it, you know, a day or over a couple of days. And so they're going to finish that one before they open the next one, right? Unless they have lots of friends over. So there are all those times, like during the week, when, you know, you just want a glass, that wine doesn't sort of make sense. But you're also sort of locked into that one experience. With Coravin, it's almost like the Spotify of wine, right? You don't have to listen to the whole album from the one band. You can listen to all sorts of different bands. You can have 3 different wines on a Tuesday. You can have a half glass of each, right? You don't, you've broken the connection between the volume of sale and the volume of consumption in whatever setting it is. It's sort of like having a wine bar in your house. You know, it's, at one point, my tradition at home is when people come over, just say, you know, go into the cellar and grab as many bottles as you like. Grab whatever you want. I had one rock musician who's a friend of mine. He's a classical musician and a rock musician. He went over, he took that very seriously. He went downstairs, he brought up 35 bottles of wine.
Wow.
I'm like, okay, rock musician, I get it. But he had actually brought up Chardonnay from around the world, Pinot Noir from around the world, Riesling from around the world, Cabernet from around the world, and he had a notebook. And he's like, okay, I just want to taste through all these and learn. I realized at that point that I had the largest wine by the glass program in the United States.
Yeah.
800 different wines, you know, from all over the world that you could try. Now, you don't have to go that kind of crazy, but the change in behavior that I normally describe to people is, instead of going to the wine store and buying one bottle, bringing it home and drinking that one bottle, go to the wine store and buy 3 bottles. Come back home and taste all 3. And then decide which one's right for you that night. You can either open it or you can just have a glass or 2. And then the next night, try the other ones, or have that glass. And build yourself a little cellar. It can be 10 different bottles or 12 different bottles. And that really is what maximizes the value of Coravin in your home, is that freedom and opportunity to offer your friends whatever they want, offer your spouse whatever they want, and drink whatever is perfect for you that evening. And the more wine you own, the more variety you've got.
I completely agree. And I think one of the things that I talk about on the show a lot is the importance of comparative tastings, and how just tasting one wine by itself is not always going to give you the best overall picture of that wine. It's better to actually taste the wine side by side with another wine. And that's something that you don't want to do when you have to fully open 2 bottles of wine, because you may not drink both completely. But with a Coravin, you have the ability to taste 2, 3, 4, 5 wines side by side, and you don't have to feel bad about it, right? And you can do that with your friends, and it's a lot easier. So totally agree. I think there's a lot of ways you can use it to really transform the way that you enjoy wine. I'm curious, because you mentioned that you tried all these different varieties in your experiments. Did you find that there were some varieties that lasted longer with the argon gas than others? Was there any difference between how different wines reacted?
There are ones that are at greater risk to misuse or non-optimal use of the Coravin than others. Nebbiolo is tough as nails. It's not frightened of little oxygen, right? California Cab's pretty tough too. I've done blind tastings with bottles of California Cab that were open 20 years ago, Coravin 20 years ago, versus full bottles. We just did this out at Napa with wine producers, and they couldn't tell the difference. I mean,
Wow.
the things that control the longevity of the wine, to some extent, of the grape, Pinot Noir, Burgundy is very is a very subtle grape, and you can pick up the changes pretty quickly. So you have to take the most care with it. Older wines that have very low sulfur, no sulfur wines or low sulfur wines, those are also at greatest risk. Sulfur eats oxygen, and so protects the wine. If it doesn't have any sulfur, it's at risk. And so what we say is they're the 4 C's of Coravin: clean, clear, cellar, and cork. Clean. Most people, I was just in a national chain of steakhouses whose name shall go unsaid. They're great, but I went in and I looked at their Coravin. They use Coravin across the entire chain, and they had never washed it. So imagine a busy restaurant pouring glasses of wine every night. And I looked at the summary and I was like, it's like a glass. You wash your glasses every day. You need to wash your Coravin. And so pouring hot water at the end of service or at the end of the night through the spout of the Coravin cleans out the valve and the needle. Otherwise, bad things can grow on the inside. Not dangerous, but Brettanomyces, Saccharomyces, Acetobacter, things that are bad for wine can grow out on the inside. So wash your Coravin, clean, clear, particularly with the timeless system, the one with the needle, the original, just before you go into the next bottle, give the trigger a quick press. It clears the needle of any wine from the last bottle or any air that might be on the inside, so that you don't inject that wine or air into your next bottle. It doesn't affect it if you access a bottle just once, but if you repeatedly access a bottle without doing that, you're injecting a little bit of air and oxidized wine from the last wine every time. So press the trigger. Cellar, store your wines in the cold on their side. Some people say, oh, there's argon in the bottle. The bottle's safe from any aging. No, light, heat, vibration, still bad and for wine. And so keep it on its side, keep the cork wet. And cork. The one thing that I found was, as wines get older, if they're not stored well, particularly, the corks dry out and become less elastic. Coravin relies on the elasticity of cork to reseal after the needle is withdrawn. We do use a kind of needle that doesn't remove material, but if it's not elastic, it won't reseal, just like plastic corks. And so I always say with older corks, you want to be cautious, test them. I wrap my hand around the neck of the bottle, put my thumb on top and push down on the cork to see if it slides. If it slides, don't use timeless because the cork is failing. We have another product called Pivot, which you can use in those bottles. Which led to a weird, unpredictable use of Pivot, which we did not expect. So clean, clear, cellar, and cork, and the wines can last forever. I've done blind tastings with Burgundy at 5 years with Burgundy producers that access those bottles themselves. So it's the grape variety is not the dominant factor. It's really storage, usage of Coravin and cork.
That's incredible. Thank you for the overview. And you actually gave a quick look into my next question. I was going to ask if you can walk us through your portfolio, because obviously you have the original Coravin product, which you've explained to us with the needle, but then you introduced the Pivot a few years ago, and then somewhat recently in the last few years, also a sparkling wine option as well. So walk us through the portfolio.
Sure. Well, I invented most of the portfolio, and you heard the invention story of Coravin. When we founded the company, I said Coravin is always going to be faster, easier, and more fun. It's going to be independent of the closure used: cork, screw cap, glass, cork, plastic, and it'll work on still or sparkling wines. So that was the goal in 2011, and we started working on all that pretty much right at the beginning. And so the other key to my inventions is I fly to Australia a lot. Australia is one of our biggest markets. And do a tour of the country, meeting with wineries and restaurants and consumers. And I always wind up in Sydney at the end. And there's a dinner that gets thrown where everybody brings a bottle, and everyone gets a little tipsy. And there's this wonderful guy named Lou who owns and runs a restaurant called The Stunned Mullet, which is one of my favorite restaurant names. And Lou is is my customer research. For whatever reason, he's a complainer. I think he's originally from the Bronx or Brooklyn, maybe Brooklyn. Sorry, Lou. And now Australian. So he's got this fascinating accent. And he always pulls me aside at the end of the night and he goes, Greg, I love Coravin, but it pours too slowly for the restaurant. It takes training to learn how to use, or you waste gas or break needles. It doesn't work with all closures, even though it now works with screw cap. We have an adapter. It doesn't work with all closures. And I don't need my wines to last 5 years in the restaurant. And I said, I always go, so Lou, you like Coravin? And so on the airplane back, which is 23 hours from Sydney to Boston, I always design something. And so Lou is responsible for pivot, aerator. What else is he responsible for? Screw cap. So he's important. So pivot pours a glass in a few seconds, works with any closure because you remove the closure and you place our stopper. So we have a stopper that goes into the bottle. One of the things that stopper does is it opens up pivot to everything with a glass neck. So spirits, tequila, whiskey, scotch, sherries, ports, anything with a T-top can now be served by Coravin, which couldn't be before, with pivot. Sake, I'm seeing a lot of use of pivot in sake in Japan. Old corks, bottle of like 1960-something Chateau Yquem with a bad cork. They pulled it in a restaurant. This thing is like a $10,000 bottle of wine with a pivot stopper in it. So it works with any closure, takes no training, has no needle, cannot waste gas. It's the most efficient system we've made. So you get more glasses per capsule of argon out of pivot. And it's great. And so I wind up using it quite a lot on screw cap bottles, on sake. I used to live in Japan. So I use it on spirits because spirits do oxidize, actually, interestingly. I found this out from a hotel in Scotland that was using pivot to serve scotch. They used to discount their scotch the longer it had been open, or the deeper into the bottle. Now they don't. So that's pivot. The only downside of pivot is you need a stopper for every bottle. The stoppers are reusable, but the greater, you can imagine in my cellar with 800 bottles, I need 800 stoppers. So I always say to people, how many bottles do you have? And if you have like 3 to 6 bottles, use pivot. It's a great system, and the least expensive of our systems to access. And then sparkling. Go ahead.
Sorry, and for the pivot, does the bottle last as long as it does with the traditional system?
I left that out. So pivot was really important for us as a discovery system. We use a stopper, and when we started with the stopper, it was made out of silicon rubber before we launched, and we were testing it, and everything oxidized. And silicon rubber is really the stopper that's used in all wine stoppers. And so it's just a really useful thing. It cleans, it always holds its shape. The downside is it's an open window to oxygen. So not to get too nerdy, but if you look up most permeable elastomer on Google, oxygen permeable elastomer, you'll find silicon. And so we had to find another material, actually a medical material, that does not allow oxygen to transgress or go through. And so the stopper now makes the wine last at least a month. We've made some improvements. I'm finding it's like 3 to 6 months that the wine can last. The goal was a month, and we know that we hit that with all sorts of wines, but I'm seeing that it lasts considerably longer. So at least 1 month. So you don't get the years out of a Coravin, but in a restaurant setting, it's great. And at home, most people finish a bottle in a month.
That's awesome. Great, thank you.
It's been a great system. We see it a lot in restaurants. The speed of pour is super useful. And it's super easy to use. So we're selling more and more pivot. We're probably about half pivot, half timeless now out of our retail online, which is great because I think there are different needs that people have. And then sparkling, wow, did that product change my life? It was a writer for a newspaper in the UK when we launched the original Coravin. She said immediately, "Does it work on sparkling?" And I spent 11 years, Desi, developing this thing. First question out of her mouth: "Does it work on sparkling?" No. And so Coravin systems only work on still wine until we launched sparkling. So it took us 8 years to develop, but now we have a Coravin sparkling system You open the bottle and pour like you normally would, and then we have a stopper that uses the same special material from Pivot to prevent oxidation, and a charger that recharges the perlage, or the CO2 pressure on the headspace of the bottle. Sparkling wines last a month. They actually last considerably longer than a month. I was testing it during the pandemic. I didn't drink much champagne because it went bad, right? In two ways, it would go flat or oxidize. So I just didn't drink it over those 11 years of testing. There was no sparkling wine in my life. I drank it on holidays or somebody's birthday, right? Whenever it sort of made sense to finish a bottle. But that's not how I drank anymore. So it was just not part of my life until this wonderful woman at a newspaper whose name I'm going to remember suggested we work on sparkling. So we spent 4 years going down a path that didn't work, and then 4 years going the right way. And in the last 2 years, that was right in the heat of the pandemic. And so it was my job to test our system. So 250 different sparkling wines in my wine fridge right over there, with control bottles so I could do blind tasting. It was the best way to pass the pandemic if you have to. And we came up with a system that actually wound up working. And I wrote to all of my wine friends. I'm actually seeing Robert Parker tomorrow. And I know Jancis Robinson well, and deep respect for both of them, and lots of other folks in the wine industry and sommelier. And I wrote to them and said, what will be the hardest sparkling wine to preserve? And I got back all sorts of things: Blanc de Noir, low dosage, high dosage, low perlage, high perlage. The right answer came from Jancis Robinson in a very terse email, which is classic to her. She said, "Pet nat. You can't preserve pet nat. Don't know why you'd want to." That was it. So there are emails you save. And she's right. Pet nat is the hardest. It's essentially unfiltered. It's like beer with yeast still in it. That lasts a month. This is a long answer, but that lasts a month. Champagne lasts 3 months plus. I just had my first English sparkling served to me that had been preserved for a year under Coravin sparkling. So I don't know how long it lasts, but it's at least a month.
Very cool. That's amazing, especially because with sparkling wine, we all know usually 2 to 3 days, and then that's it, right? And maybe even by that third day, a lot of the bubbles have dissipated. So, pretty revolutionary. That's incredible.
The uptake in restaurants has been big, and by the sales forces of champagne producers, right? They're showing their wines, and the stuff goes flat over the course of the day. And I have to say, more and more consumers, it changes the way I drink sparkling wine. I have a glass of champagne every day. Every day.
That.
I have 6 different bottles of sparkling wine open in those fridges over there. I was just on a 1.5 month tour of Europe and Colorado on vacation. I come back, there's a bunch of open sparkling. That's fine. I go in, we have a glass. It's great, right? It's champagne is an everyday thing. Sparkling wine is you should celebrate every day or any day.
I agree. I was in Champagne this summer, and I was visiting with someone there, and it was 10 o'clock in the morning, and they offered me champagne. They said, "Well, it's the the water of Champagne. We just drink it throughout the day." And I said, "Really? It's not even noon." And she's like, "Oh yeah, no, this is what we do here." And I was like, "Okay, I'm going to adopt this and take it home because I love it." Because you're right. It's just, it doesn't have to be saved for special occasions. Really, you can just enjoy a glass a day, whether it's before dinner to, get your appetite ready. But it's something that's, it's special, and we shouldn't have to save it for special occasions. And honestly, with the Coravin, we don't have to. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think you also found out the secret of the wine industry, that the best thing possible is to be born into a champagne producer. I mean, what a life. I've become friends with Mathieu Bilcar, and I got to tell you, what a life that guy has. What a wonderful guy he is.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I know you've recently introduced a very new technology. It's called Coravin Vinitas, right? Can you tell listeners a little bit about this one? Because this took a bit of a turn into a different direction.
It did. It's so far all of Coravin products are equally relevant at home, in the restaurant, in the winery, and in the sales forces of distributors and importers. And I love that. I mean, that's a lucky thing as an inventor, to have something that has relevance in multiple situations across an industry. Vinitas does have that relevance, but in a very different way. So our customer is the winery, the importer, the distributor. And the idea is this: Coravin, you'd mentioned, saves money, right? You don't waste any wine. You always have the right wine. And so now that one bottle becomes 5 different occasions you can drink it, as opposed to just the one, without any wastage. The problem that I was seeing was that as a consumer, in order to be able to understand a wine at the retail location, in general, you've got to buy a whole bottle. So you have no idea whether or not you like the wine, and you've got to commit to 750 million milliliters of that wine and the price of that 750 milliliters. And so I was thinking, is there a way we can not just fractionalize the consumption of wine, which is what Coravin does? It breaks it up into different moments or experiences. Can we fractionalize the sale of wine at retail or from the winery? Can we make it so that wine is more approachable? Instead of buying one bottle from a winery, buy 7 different wines from that winery for the same price. How can you do that? How can you break up wine into smaller bottles? Now, people have been trying to sell half bottles of wine for the longest time. The problem with them is they're actually quite expensive to make. And you never know how many you need at the beginning. And so you guess at the quantity. And so you produce a whole bunch of wine in half bottles, then you hope it sells, right? And if it doesn't, the shelf life of smaller bottles is lower. So you might have just wasted a bunch of wine as a winery. So we came up with this way of, it's essentially the world's smallest bottling line. It's a little machine that looks like a microwave, the size of a microwave, fits on a tabletop, and it can fractionalize a bottle of wine into 7 smaller bottles, 100 milliliters each, in a couple minutes. You can fractionalize a case of wine in about 30 minutes into 100 milliliter samples that can then be sent out to press or trade, left behind at restaurants, and they have a shelf life of a year. And so I actually have one sitting here. Onyx Wines out of California has been using it, and I went onto their website, and they sold a 4-pack of 4 of their different wines in the Coravin Vinitas sample bottles, and they have a QR code that links to it. I'm actually going to now go to the QR code, and they're going to walk me through a tasting. And it kind of came from all the tastings that were happening during the pandemic. That people were sending full bottles to people, 3 or 4 full bottles, and then holding an online tasting. And you would notice in those tastings, people would open one bottle and be drinking that, and leave the other 2 unopened because they didn't want to waste them, and they were listening to somebody tell them about those 2 bottles without tasting it. And so a friend of mine who was running these tastings said, "Hey, Greg, is there a way you can break bottles down into smaller bottles so we can ship them?" And so Vinitas was just recently launched, and we're being used by wineries, we're being used by importers and distributors. Depending upon the laws of the country, we're being used by retailers. So in Australia, for example, retailers can break down bottles and say, "Here are 7 different Napa cabs. Tell us which ones you want." Full bottles of, or a case of. And so it's Vinitas is a different system because we sell it to only the wine producer or to the professional, and the end result winds up in the consumer's hands or in the restaurant's hands or in the wine writer's hands. It's interesting. One of the other things that we've looked at is carbon footprint. When you ship a bottle of wine, the vast majority of the carbon footprint of the wine is the shipping costs and the weight of the bottle and the shipment. And so I was in a massive retailer in the UK, and they said that they throw away hundreds of liters of wine a day because they just taste it and they don't need the rest of the wine. And I said, first of all, use Coravin, right? You should be tasting with Coravin. And they're like, yeah, but we're not going to give it away. We're a wine retailer, so we're not going to give it to friends. We need friends to buy our wines, right? We don't have room to store all these wines. And so we're just throwing them all away. And think of the carbon footprint of that. Why are they sending us a full bottle when we need 100 milliliters? And so now that wine retailer is now receiving Vinitas samples. We will do anything we can to expand the way that wine is enjoyed, served, and sold.
It's pretty incredible. And when I first learned about the Vinitas, it was surprising to me because I was thinking, okay, wow, they're making a shift because they've created products in the past that have been so focused on, all aspects of the industry, especially consumers. And now this is very much more industry focused. But actually, I guess when I think about it, it is still a focus on the consumer because you are making sure that the end consumer is going to have an opportunity to maybe sample something that they wouldn't typically be able to because they'd have to buy a full bottle. It's going to give the winery more of an opportunity to give opportunity to try their wines. It's going to help some of these distributors and retailers allow folks to taste wines maybe in the store or as a sample box that they wouldn't otherwise be able to offer. And so actually, I think for the end consumer, Vinitas is going to still continue to transform the way that they get to experience wine. So it's going to make it easier through the sale and distribution, but I think it's going to impact the final consumer too. So really, it's another incredible product to add to the portfolio that I think will better every aspect of the industry that's involved.
That's our dream. It's again, it's a change in behavior, and unlike most of the other changes in behavior, right? There really was no existing business model beforehand before Vinitas. Not really, right? With Coravin, there was already wine by the glass. There were already preservation systems, but there's very few examples of people trying to use smaller formats. I think probably the best example is wine in can. Which grew like crazy. And I think when you think about it, wine is one of the only perishable beverages that comes in a multi-serving container, right? You can buy beer in a can. You can buy mixed drinks in a single serve. It's wine. Why are we stuck with 750 milliliters? I was talking to somebody at Berry Brothers and Rudd, the oldest wine store still in operation in London. And he was like, the reason why is because of the lung volume of an English glass blower in the 1600s. That's why. The cork in glass was invented by the British. It was a bottler in the UK in the 1600s. And, a single blow into this glass mold was what formed bottles of wine. And it was roughly 750 milliliters of volume, plus or minus, and that's why we have the volume we have, and the consumption of wine has shaped itself around this volume, right? You have 2 people to finish a bottle, or 3 people to finish a bottle, and if you want multiple bottles, you have to have more people. That it's kind of crazy when you think about it. And so I believe that the next revolution in wine is going to be long shelf life, small format, low carbon footprint, sort of single serve. Right now, the shelf life, Coravin Vinitas is one of the longest, out to a year. We use glass and screw cap, and zero oxygen contact during the transfer, to make sure that the wine lasts for at least a year. Maybe we can get it to go longer, and we're checking on it. But cans, you have to sell them and then drink them within 6 months ish, and it depends on the style of wine and the type of wine because it goes bad in different ways. There's Tetra Pak and other attempts at making smaller format, and they all have very short shelf lives. So I think it sounds boring, but there's going to be a packaging innovation in the world of wine that both decreases the carbon footprint of wine and increases the accessibility of wine by making it less expensive to find out whether or not you like it. Right?
I think that's exciting. Yeah, it's not geeky at all. I think it's super exciting. And I think as someone who's in the wine industry, who loves wine, who's passionate about trying new wines, I would be thrilled to have smaller format wines that can last a long time, to be able to try more, right? That maybe would even be a little more affordable for me than a 750 milliliter, right? So I think it's fabulous. And I'm here cheering you on. The more you can invent, because everything you've created so far has been such a success, the more you can create and invent to make that dream a reality, I think will be phenomenal. So really, really exciting. What's next for Coravin? You've created all these incredible things. Anything big on the horizon in the next year and a half?
Well, Vinitas and building business models, that's for sure. I mean, we have a 100 milliliter sample. We're going to be trying to do 50 milliliter samples, and then by the glass. We have a restaurant in Germany, Sticks and Stones, just outside of, or in Munich, that is using Vinitas very creatively in the restaurant to serve people flights. And so the guy will pour the first glass or two by Coravin out of a bottle, and then he'll fractionalize the rest of it using Vinitas that night. And he's built these racks of 6 different spaces for our bottles. And he'll serve somebody 6 different California cabs, 6 different Australian Shiraz, 6 different, he's super creative guy named Justin Leone, who was on Master Chef in Germany. He's brilliant. So we're going to try to evolve these different business models. We did open a pop-up wine bar in London that was open for about 3 or 6 months. We wound up losing out on competing with a lease with one of our customers. It was a beautiful location. We didn't want to compete with this restaurateur because he uses Coravin across all of his restaurants, so I didn't want to mess with him. He's great. But we learned a ton by having it. We had 50 different sparkling wines by the glass. We had 300 different wines by the glass. And so I think we're going to still, there are a couple of innovations that are going to come out of that that I'm hoping you'll see over the next 6 months to a year and a half.
Amazing. Very cool. Well, I will make sure that I include in our show notes the social media contact and website information for Coravin so that the listeners can go ahead and follow along to see these exciting things that'll come out in the coming months and years, because I know everyone will be really excited to follow your journey and see what you come up with next. I think there's a lot of exciting things in the horizon, and I'll be excited to follow as long. So Greg, thank you so much. This has been such a fabulous conversation, and I really appreciate your time just giving us all the info about Coravin and sharing your story on the Wine CEO podcast today.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks to my team, without which we would not exist. I made one system out of a basement. They made millions of systems, and with some beautiful design. And thanks to all of our customers who have shown the creativity of how our products can be used to make people happier. And to give each other better experiences with this wonderful beverage that we all love. And thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for joining.
All right, friends, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Greg. He was an awesome guest on the show, such a nice guy, and a really incredible business entrepreneur. I loved learning about the amazing things that Coravin is doing in the wine industry, all the various products that they have, and the focus that they have to truly transform the way consumers and wine industry professionals are interacting with wine. It's incredible, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like and share this show with a friend. If you want to learn more about Coravin, check out the show notes from today's episode. I have lots of links in there so that you can shop on the Coravin website. You can look at all of their products and learn so much more from Coravin. Don't forget to subscribe to the show if you haven't yet. Every Wednesday on the Wine CEO podcast, I bring you a new episode, whether I'm interviewing winemakers, talking to industry professionals like Greg today, or just sharing my own perspective on a wine topic. It helps bring wine to you in a fun and approachable way, not an overwhelming and snobby way that sometimes wine can be presented. And if you have a question about this episode or wine in general, you can always send me an email, sarah@thewineceo.com. You can also send me a direct message on Instagram @thewineceo, and I would be more than happy to help in any way I can. Until next week, friends, drink something new and delicious, and I will catch you all in the next episode of the Wine CEO podcast.